Once upon a time, in the quiet town of Maplewood, nestled between rolling hills and mighty oaks, lived a man named Major Henry Carter. Known for his valor and commitment, he served his country dutifully in the military for over 3 decades. Major Carter was more than just a soldier. He was a beloved figure within the community, admired not only for his numerous medals and commendations, but also for his infectious laughter and warm-hearted nature. His home was always open to those in need, and he often hosted barbecues and gatherings that brought the community together. As autumn descended upon Maplewood, the vibrant hues of red, orange, and gold enveloped the landscape, creating a picturesque view that seemed fitting for the man who had dedicated his life to service. One crisp morning, the town gathered to pay their final respects to Major Carter, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75. The funeral was set to take place in the local cemetery, which was adorned with fluttering American flags, honored by those who wished to pay tribute to a soldier who had given so much. As the sun rose, casting a golden light over the serene cemetery, dozens of mourners arrived, each carrying heavy hearts. Among them was Sergeant First Class Aaron Wallace, a retired veteran and a close friend of Major Carter. Dressed in immaculate dress blues, Wallace epitomized the essence of a soldier. His uniform crisp and polished, the medals on his chest gleaming under the sun. His posture was tall and resolute, but his heart was weighed down by sorrow. The ceremony commenced as a rendition of taps echoed through the cemetery, the haunting melody intertwining with the rustling leaves. Wallace stood beside Carter's grieving widow, offering steady support, his hands clasped lightly over hers. As the eulogy unfolded, recounting the many sacrifices and achievements of Major Carter, tears glistened in the eyes of those gathered. But just as the eulogy reached its emotional crescendo, a disruptive sound broke the solemnity of the service. A blaring siren of a police cruiser pieced the serene air, followed by the rumbling of its engine. Officer Kyle Dennison, a notorious figure known for his abrasive demeanor, emerged from the car. With a reputation marked by prejudice and hostility, he strided through the rows of mourners, his gaze assessing the attendees with an unsettling suspicion. "Excuse me." Dennison's voice cut through the air as he approached Wallace, hand hovering near his holstered weapon. "What are you doing here? You don't belong at this funeral." The crowd faltered, confusion and disbelief rippling outward as Wallace turned, his brow furrowing in utter shock. "Officer, I'm here to honor a fellow soldier, Major Henry Carter. Is there a problem?" Wallace's heart raced. He recognized the precarious nature of the encounter, but his military training kicked in, urging him to maintain composure. "You heard me," Dennison snapped, his tone sharp and laden with contempt. "This doesn't look like your kind of place." Wallace felt the tension rising among the crowd, whispers igniting the air as attendees exchanged bewildered glances. The silence became palpable, thick with uncertainty, while Wallace's resolve began to strengthen. "Officer, I serve this country just like Major Carter." "You are in the wrong here," Wallace asserted, struggling to keep his anger at bay. The murmurs grew louder as attendees reacted to Dennison's blatant display of aggression. Wallace raised a hand slightly in a calming gesture. "We're mourning a man who risked his life for this country, a soldier who deserves our respect." "Respect?" Dennison scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "I'll decide what's right, and I'm deciding that you're a threat." In an alarming display of reckless authority, Dennison's hand moved to draw his weapon, the cold steel glinting ominously in the sunlight. The uproar among the crowd erupted, people instinctively stepping back, some pulling out their phones to capture the escalating confrontation while shouting protests. An elderly man in the back of the crowd shouted, "This is disgraceful. Put the gun down." Another voice, that of a younger soldier in uniform, stepped forward cautiously, embodying the spirit of camaraderie. "This man has done more for this country than you could ever dream. You should be ashamed." Determined to remain a bastion of calm amidst chaos, Wallace stood his ground, his heart pounding but his expression unwavering. "Officer Dennison, you're making a grave mistake," he warned, his voice low but filled with authority. "There are many witnesses here. You're pointing a loaded weapon at an unarmed soldier who's honoring a fellow veteran. The air was thick with tension, punctuated only by the distant rustling of leaves and the faint hum of a police radio from Dennison's belt. The sight of the barrel trained on Wallace's chest shocked the gathered mourners into silence, disbelief mingling with anger and fear. "I don't care who you are," Dennison shouted, the gun steady in his hands, but the uncertainty flickering in his eyes told a different story. In that charged moment, Wallace's steady gaze locked onto Dennison's as he took a single step forward, cautiously but defiantly. "You're losing control, officer," Wallace stated simply, the quiet strength in his voice cutting through the mounting anxiety. "You're showing everyone here exactly who you are." "Shut up," Dennison snapped, taking an instinctive step closer, his grip on the weapon tightening. But just as he did, the full weight of the moment seemed to catch up to him. The sirens in the distance grew louder, an indomitable reminder of the consequences that would soon follow. "Stand down," Wallace ordered firmly, as if addressing a soldier amidst battle. The arrival of backup was imminent, and the impact of the crowd awaiting resolution sparked a new resolve within him. "Put the gun down," a younger man shouted again, stepping forward with authority, displaying his own military ID badge, a reminder to Dennison of the uniform respect that Wallace deserved. "You're disgracing every veteran here." The officer's bravado began to falter as he retained that gun aimed at Wallace, the realization dawning that his footing was precarious. The hooting sirens marked the arrival of squad cars, law enforcement responding to the situation, and something in Dennison's demeanor shifted as he regarded the incoming authorities. "Let's not escalate this, Officer Dennison," Wallace urged, his voice penetrating the air. "You can either lower your weapon now, or the officers approaching will decide your fate." The arrival of the squad cars transformed the atmosphere completely. The cacophony of sirens dissipated, leaving whispers of disbelief echoing among the crowd, who stood in anxious anticipation of what would unfold next. One of the responding officers, Lieutenant Morales, a familiar face in the police force, quickly assessed the scene. He had served alongside Wallace, and recognition dawned as he understood the gravity of the situation surrounding his trusted comrade. "What's going on here?" Morales called out, approaching cautiously as his officers remained back, ready yet vigilant. This officer, Wallace began, never breaking eye contact with Dennison, pointed his weapon at an unarmed veteran at a funeral, simply because he assumed I didn't belong. Bereft of his defiance, Dennison's face looked increasingly pale as Morales turned his gaze upon him. "Kyle, is this true?" The query deported with a mix of disbelief and accusation. Dennison struggled to justify his actions, stammering incoherently, but Morales cut him off sharply. "You pointed a firearm at a decorated soldier. Explain yourself." The weight of that error extended far past the funeral. The crowd's palpable anger grew. Shouts of condemnation echoed around the cemetery. Wallace's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain composed, highlighting the severity of the situation. "Enough of this," Morales commanded, his authority and experience clearing a path for rationality. "Lower your weapon, Kyle. Now." The slightest hesitation gripped Dennison, and in that precarious moment, the officer's grip began to slip. By barely lowering his gun, he finally acquiesced, the sound of the mechanism clicking a testimony to accountability. A heavy silence descended upon the crowd, quickly transforming into loud cheers and applause. Dennison was relieved of duty, his dismissal characterized as urgent and necessary by Morales, who motioned for two officers to take him into custody. Wallace exhaled quietly, a wave of relief washing over him, though it was anything but a loss of the day. The murmurs of outrage and mockery continued to resonate. Cameras capturing the harrowing encounter filled social media with cries for justice. The moment allowed Wallace to emerge as something more than a soldier. He became a symbol of resilience. With dignity intact, he turned to comfort Major Carter's grieving family, kneeling beside Carter's widow, her trembling hands clutching the American flag that adorned his casket. "I'm sorry this happened on such a sacred day," Wallace offered, his voice gentle as he sought to assuage her sorrow. Carter's widow met his gaze with tears pooling in her eyes. "Thank you for standing up for us today. Henry would have been so proud of you," she said, her voice raw with emotion. Wallace nodded respectfully, the weight of responsibility resting heavily upon him. It was about him. It was always about him. His legacy will never be shadowed by one man's actions. As the funeral came to a close, the day's events rippled through the community like a stone dropped in a lake, creating waves of awareness and outrage. The incident began to change lives in ways Wallace could have never anticipated. Clips of the confrontation went viral, igniting social media debates about systemic racism and police accountability, fostering necessary discussions that the town hadn't dared engage in before. Within days of the incident, veteran organizations came together, rallying behind Wallace. Many crafted speeches advocating for change, pushing for reforms that included mandatory racial bias training and thorough investigations into police conduct. The hashtags #JusticeForWallace and #RacistCopAccountability trended, penetrating households across America and elevating the narrative to national prominence. Months rolled forward, and eventually, Wallace was invited to speak before both local and national platforms. His words echoed the sentiments of thousands, shedding light on the hard truths society often chose to ignore. His eloquence and resilient spirit ignited cathartic waves of change throughout a nation embroiled in introspection and a quest for justice. When the trial date arrived, the courtroom was filled with a diverse crowd of veterans and community members, all hoping to hear the verdict for Officer Dennison. The tension in the air was palpable as Dennison entered the room, flanked by his defense attorney. His expression, once filled with bravado, now reflected uncertain anxiety as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by Naomi Grant, a formidable attorney known for her dedication to social justice, made a compelling case. She painted a vivid picture of the events that unfolded that fateful day, emphasizing how the officer's actions betrayed the trust of the community. Officer Dennison's behavior wasn't just reckless. It was a glaring example of prejudice, she asserted, addressing the jury. When he pointed a gun at Sergeant Wallace, he made a decision based solely on fear, not reason. He placed the life of a fellow soldier in jeopardy due to inherited biases. As videos from the day circulated, depicting Dennison's aggression and the calm that Wallace had maintained, the jury listened intently. Witness after witness corroborated Wallace's story, recounting the shock and outrage they felt when they witnessed the incident unfold. Finally, Wallace took the stand, embodying the dignity of his character. "As I stood there, I didn't see just myself," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "I thought of all the soldiers I'd lost over the years, friends who had paid the ultimate price. I was reminded that our fight for justice didn't end on the battlefield. It continued at home, where we are expected to live freely, without fear." The courtroom remained silent, each individual absorbing the weight of his words. The day continued to unfold, inching closer to the jury's decision. Tension thrummed throughout the space as deliberations commenced, the fates of the officer and Sergeant Wallace swirling together as they awaited the verdict. Will it be victory? Many wondered. Or will it be another echo of injustices long endured? Finally, after deliberations, the jury emerged with a much-anticipated verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Kyle Dennison, guilty on all counts." Applause erupted from the gallery. Tears fell freely as Wallace absorbed the monumental moment. With the verdict set in stone, the sentencing day arrived, bringing a new wave of anticipation and justice. The atmosphere in the courtroom felt ceremonial, yet invigorated, as the same patrons, veterans, and community members gathered, hoping for a meaningful conclusion to the turmoil they had witnessed. As Dennison was brought into the room, his confidence had faded completely. The judge addressed him sternly, accurately juxtaposing his actions against the expectations of an officer of the law. "Your actions were a gross violation of the trust placed in you. You endangered lives and perpetuated fear in a community that looks to you for protection." As the judge pronounced an 8-year sentence for his actions, the crowd erupted again, chanting Wallace's name. their voices united in a harmonious conclusion. Justice had not merely been served, they had witnessed it. In the aftermath of the trial, Wallace emerged stronger than ever, stepping into an advocacy role he had never anticipated. Schools began using his story to educate students on issues of tolerance, courage, and standing up against injustice. Communities organized Be Like Wallace campaigns, promoting stories of bravery and resilience that echoed Wallace's spirit. Months later, while Wallace stood once again in front of a crowd at another event, many of those present had been directly impacted by his journey. He spoke with passion, opening avenues of dialogue that would hopefully transform budding minds into crusaders for justice. History will not absolve us of our choices, he declared, holding their collective gaze with unflinching strength. But together, we can shape tomorrow to reflect values of service, mutual respect, and love. Every challenge we meet can inspire change. We need only to rise, unafraid. As Wallace's voice resonated through hearts and spirits, his message echoed the belief that courage in the face of adversity, a soldier's greatest strength, could lead to a world where everyone walked unafraid under the same sun. And thus, as the sun sets gently over Maplewood, the town thrives, forever changed by the echoes of one man's valor and those willing to stand with him. ##### the end. This expanded version provides a deeper exploration of character dynamics and the impact of the events, delving into themes of bravery, justice, and community resilience. If you would like further modification or additional elements included, please let me know.